Welcome to the Art of Boat Building. In this episode, I'll be getting started with planking the deck of the Little Auk 11 kayak. But first, I wanted to get the hull roughly faired before flipping over the boat. I started with my block plank. I'm working on a diagonal to the strips to remove the bulk of the material. I then moved on to a straight line air sander, and I was using 60 grit sandpaper. This tool does a fine job of fairing, as it is essentially a power longboard. The only caveat is that it requires a 60-gallon compressor to keep up with the air demand of the tool. I then finished off with hand sanding with a longboard. So I've got the initial fairing all done. Looks actually pretty good as it is. Once I get the deck built, we'll fair the whole thing once again. And down on the edge here, I did very little work so that I could blend those two together once I get that deck on there. So the next step now is to flip the boat over, and I'm going to need to build a couple little V blocks so that it can sit nicely in those at each end here. For the first thing I need to do is to clean out all of the clamped tools that are underneath there. I've got the boat all flipped over now and clamped down so it's nice and sturdy. So the next thing that I need to do is to start figuring out the sort of stripping pattern that I want to have on the deck. And in order to do that, one of the things that I want to figure out is exactly where the cockpit lies on here. So that's what I'm going to do next, is to get the template out and kind of generally figure out how far up I need to strip so that I have enough material for the cockpit. So I've got the plans out here for the Little Auk, and we can see in the profile plan here, it locates where the cockpit needs to be. So from the bow to the cockpit is 3 feet 6 1/2 inches. And from the aft end to the cockpit is 3 feet 6 inches. And you can see up here, it locates, we can see where the cockpit sits. So what I've got is a template here of the cockpit. And so what I'm going to do is to cut this out. And we can see that this is the aft end of it. And there's a dashed line here, which is the center line. So I'm going to cut this piece out so I can lay it up on the boat. Three foot, which is 3 foot 6, which is 42.5, puts me about right here. I'll make a little mark there on the strong back. And if I go 3 foot 6 from the aft, which would be 42 inches, so that'd be right here. If I take my pattern, that doesn't come anywhere close. So my mark is up here, and my pattern ends up right here. So I'm almost, it's like 12 inches off. We can see that the boat is just 1 inch shy of 11 feet. Now if I go back to the plans and I look, and I can see that it has 10 feet on here as the overall length, which is not correct. So if we add 3/6 and 3/6 1/2, that will give us 7 plus 3 is 10. So these two numbers have got to be incorrect, because the cockpit pattern I measured, and it is actually 2 foot 11 1/2 inches. So if I made this 48 and this 48, then my numbers come out correctly. Whenever you find a discrepancy in the plans, it's always a good idea to search them. It may seem like a scavenger hunt, but I have found the answer is always there. So in consulting the full size, or the full set of plans, I can see up here where the cockpit is, and it all measures out, so it's exactly 3 feet. So we know that that is probably a constant. And one of the things that I noticed was back here on the last page is a notation that says that the Little Auk uses the same forms as the 10-footer. And the difference is that the form spacing, so the forms for the 10 are every 12 inches, where the 11-foot auk that I'm building were 13 and 3/16. So that explains that difference. So by that logic, then, we should go in 4 feet from the bow and 4 feet from the aft end of the boat. And so then all of the measurements work out properly. So that's what I'll do. So now that I have kind of sorted out where the cockpit is going to fall on here, I need to start figuring out the pattern that my strips will end up here on the deck. So the first thing I want to do is to know what the widest point is across here. So if I take here at this station and measure across, I have 29 inches. And here I have 31 and 30. So 31, this is the longest spot. I've got a little pencil mark here where I know that the cockpit will overlap a little bit. So at this long one here, if I go from that spot down to the hull, I have 7 inches. And my strips are 3/4 of an inch. So that means that every 3 inches would be 4 strips. So that would be 8, 9, basically a little bit more than 9, we'll just say 10 strips to be safe. So the bundles that the strips come in, which I'll show in a minute, they're bundled in the board that CLC cut them out of. So they're all from the same board. And I believe that 10 is the maximum strips that come out of one board. So I'd be okay with a board or a bundle that would take me up this far. Now, what I'm looking for is to have some kind of a little bit of a pattern here on the top of the deck. I wasn't very concerned about how that pattern happened on the hull, obviously because it's the bottom. And so I wasn't real particular about how the different strips, the coloration of them or so forth, came out here. Now, one of the things I am planning on doing, I'm planning on staining the entire boat so it'll even out a lot of uneven coloration from strip to strip. So that'll be a little bit more less visible. One of the other things that I need to consider is that I have this Atlantic white cedar that is coming up, and if you remember, it is a stripe down the center line of the hull. I want that to also to continue here down at least to the cockpit, and how that ends is something I've got to figure it out. It has a pretty steep peak here, unlike at the bottom, which is practically a flat bottom. So I'll have to figure out how I want that to hit that peak and how much material I need to do that. So I've got to figure that out. I'm going to pull some strips out to give you an idea of the different types of strips that I have to work with. You can see I've got two types of strips here. These are quarter sawn, where you can see the grain is running this way, and this is flat sawn. So you can see it develops a completely different pattern than this finer grain. Now, I was very careful not to use any flat grained ones on the bottom. I used all of the quarter sawn ones like this. So what I need to do is I'm going to cut these batches open here and kind of lay them out and figure out which ones came from one board. So I've laid out several bundles here. You can see that how the coloration of these 5 strips of each one of these, how they are very similar. Now, I believe that this bundle here came from this board as well. And the reason I think that is if I take this strip and I put it next to that one, you can see how that matches, especially here in that grain. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put all of those over on this side. Like that. And now these 2 boards here, these 2 bundles, you can see look as though they came out of the same board. And the same thing is true with this bundle here, is that they came out of the same board. When I push them together, you can see how the grain kind of starts to match. So I've grouped them together here, and you can see I've got, there's 10 boards or 10 strips in each one of these bundles. So I've got 30 strips right here. If we come over here to the boat, where we can see this mark of the cockpit right here, and if I measure that distance from there down, I have 11 inches. So let's just call it 12, because that makes it easy to multiply. So every 3 inches is 4 strips. So that would be 4 strips per 3 inches, so that would be 16 strips. Now you can see I'm 1 inch less. So basically, from here to here, I need 15 strips, which are the widest that it's going to get. So I think what I have, since I need 15 strips maximum on each side, that I've got enough strips laid out there. Now, one of the things that I don't want is for there to be these distinct boards going on. So what I'm going to do is kind of try to make these a little bit more random, so that there isn't a pattern that is creating, mainly because that's what is happening down here on the hull. So that I'll kind of be duplicating this up to this point. Now what that'll do is it'll leave sort of a V-shaped section right on the top of the cockpit. And that is where I'll use those flat sawn strips, and I'll figure out to try to kind of book match them a little bit, but we'll see how that'll come out. It's much easier to book match them when you're using strips that do not have a cove and bead, because you kind of can't just flip one over and match it, because you'll end up with a bead to bead or cove to cove. But we'll figure that out once we get there. So right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of randomly try to figure out how to make those strips seem a little bit more random. So what I've got here is I've got these 2 bundles here is where I want to end up at the top of the deck. So what I've done is I put them cove to cove, because when I'll be putting these in, I'll be putting them on with the cove facing up as I go in. So what I'm going to do to make this a little more random is I'm going to take every other one and I'm going to flip it end for end. Like that, so that the grain doesn't quite want to match up and it seems a little more random. You can already see that makes it, the coloration, it just doesn't seem quite as regular. So again, I'm going to flip these end for end. One is the port side and one is the starboard side. So I'm going to continue to do that What I'm hoping to do then is to end up with these lighter strips at the shear, and then we slowly get up into these darker, more regular ones. So you can see I've got my strips all kind of randomly set out here now. What I need to do is to number these so that I know that I'm going to keep them in order. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to start with the piece that I'm going to use at the shear, which would be here. And I'm going to number that 1, and then 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, and 14. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. I have 14 strips, as I removed 1 from each side, as I will need the bead cut off. That will give me a good squared edge at the dividing line between the hull and the deck. I also numbered the strips in the center and also on the other end. 14. Now that I've got those all kind of figured out, now one of the things you have to bear in mind is here at strip number 1, it's not going to go all the way. It's going to end up short because my strips are only 8 feet long, and the distance from the bow to the stern is about, it's like 11 foot 6 inches. So there's going to be some scarfing that will need to go in there. And I've got some other strips here that are very close in color, that what I'll do when I get to that point, I'll pick out a strip that I think is appropriate to add that extra. Now, as I'm working up, those strips will start getting shorter and shorter as they start crossing each other at the center line. So speaking of the center line, the next thing to do is to get that it's Alaskan yellow cedar strip down the center of the hull. So I've got a strip of the Alaskan yellow cedar here that is going to go right down the center line of the kayak like this. Now the strips are 3/4 of an inch, so of course I'm going to need to trim it down so I have a nice flat edge on each side, and also and I'll trim that down to a 1/2 inch, and also so that it will match the stem there, which is a 1/2 inch wide. So the cockpit starts about right here, and the strips, if you'll remember now, we've got 14 strips, so at this widest spot right here is 10 3/4. So 14 strips comes out to be 10 1/4 inches. So if I come here at 10 1/4 inches, you can see that I end up right at the center line. So this is these strips will come up here and will meet up at this point, and at this station here is where they will start diverging into sort of a V pattern up here, and it'll be about so wide at this point. And that's where I will use those flat sawn planks, is for that section. So let me show you very quickly what those planks look like laid out. Well, in order to give myself a little space here, I made this little rack here to hold these strips in their order. So this stack here, it starts with 1 and it moves down to 14, and so that is for the port side. So now I've got the starboard side here, and I'm going to stack them the same way. So I've already got a couple in there, and I will then stack these in descending order, starting with 14. I got this idea from my friend Nick Schotted, who made a little rack like this in order to sort strips. This will also give me a convenient way to keep them stored and organized. And also give me a little bit more bench space here that I can show you how those flat sawn pieces will lay out. So here's a bundle of flat sawn that I'm going to use. So you can see here on the end that these top stack of 10 is a different board than below. So basically what I have is I have 10 8-foot strips. So let's go over to the boat and I'll show you how many of these I need. So if we look here, once we get planked up to where the cockpit is and we measure this, we've got about, looks like 4 and just a little bit more than 4 1/4. So basically, all we need is about 5 strips, because remember we are also ending out in here where these strips will come up more at an angle. So those strips come in bundles of each board was sawn. There were 10 strips sawn out of each board. So by having 5 on each side, we're going to have plenty from out of one board, which will be nice as far as the matching goes. And also that we know that it ends here at this station is where these side planks will come in and meet. So between that and the where the cockpit starts is it's about, well, a little more than 24 inches. So 24 inches is plenty. So with those strips being 8 feet long, we've got plenty then that we can use on the aft deck to complete that pattern. So let me show you how these look laid out. I've separated these bundles in the 2 boards that they came out of. Now if we take this top strip and we roll it over, you can see how that book matches with the piece right below it. So they're very, I don't see that one stack is better than the other. Let's see, this one probably not quite as pretty as the other one is, but you get the idea here about how those patterns can emerge. So there's actually a system of laying these out that Nick Shada has a nice video about sorting strips. And I will, we're going to do that in another video because it's a little bit more, as he calls a brain teaser. So anyway, I think we've got all of our strips sorted and figured out on what we need to do on the Little Auk. So that's pretty much it for this episode. Now in the next episode, we will start getting some deck planks on the Little Auk. So as always, thanks for watching, and remember, if you're going to make it beautiful.